Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Let's talk about my initial impressions of this Explorer 40 reference 224270 next to the Mark II reference 214270, the 39 millimeter, which is the kind of the previous version of the Explorer before Rolex decided to bring it back to 36 millimeters and then jump back up to 40 millimeters. So it's a very interesting choice by Rolex. Not sure what the exact thinking behind going down to such a small classic size and jumping it back up to 40 was. There's a lot of speculation that Rolex kind of regretted discontinuing the Mark II 39 millimeter and decided to bring back, a larger size. Maybe it was to make sure that the Explorer stayed quote unquote more modern size next to the OP41s and the other, 40 plus millimeter watches in their sports catalog. But whatever the reason may be, Rolex brought back a larger size offering for the Rolex Explorer. And this 40 millimeter watch is fairly similar to the 39 millimeter. When I had a chance to compare the two side by side, my eyes were almost a little fooled by just how similar this was to the Mark II. Now, there is definitely differences, and with Rolex, as with a lot of watches, the devil is in the details, but we'll go through some of those differences. As far as similarities, these watches, the 39 millimeter and the 40 are very close. The biggest difference is going to be the lug width. This 40 millimeter model has lug width of 21 millimeter, whereas the previous Mark II had 20 millimeters. So it gives the watch a wider stance on the wrist. And then the lug to lug is also larger on this, a little bit wider versus the Mark II, whereas in the Mark II is 47.4 millimeters. And in the 36 millimeter 124270, the lug width was a very small 45 millimeters. So that's a ton of numbers to throw around. But the long and short of it is that this watch has a wider stance on the wrist, even more so than the Mark II. And you will notice it a little bit. Now, I have 6.5 inch wrists in circumference, and I did notice that this watch has some slight overhang versus the Mark II. I do feel that the Mark II overall has a better fit on my wrist. It's more tailored. It has that 20 millimeter lug width, that 47.4 millimeter lug to lug. It just felt like a perfectly tailored suit on my wrist. Whereas the Explorer 40, it has a bolder stance. It has more presence, more real estate. And then there are some differences as far as the dial details that set it apart from the Mark II as well. Now, the first biggest detail is that this is now a gloss black dial versus the matte dial on the Mark II. Now, the Mark II's matte dial is going to be the last of that kind. I foresee Rolex not really bringing back the matte dial. That will probably be the last of the Explorers to feature that. So that in and of itself will make the Mark II a little bit more collectible. But this Explorer 40 goes into the modern age with a gloss black dial, just like in the 36 millimeter version, and just gives the watch a more bold, more modern appearance. And another difference is going to be Rolex moving that Explorer text to the 12 o'clock position right underneath Oyster Perpetual. And so this mirrors what Rolex did with the 36 millimeter 124270. They're basically bringing the same aesthetics into a larger case. So this will have a more modern stance. I think it has more overall universal appeal. And even though a lot of people on the online forums will say, oh, 36, that's the best size for the Explorer. Anything above 36, the Mark II is okay, but the 40 millimeter Explorer is way too large. I tend to disagree with that only because I felt that the previous 36 millimeter 124270, that was a little too diminutive. It was a little bit small with the 19 millimeter lugs, 35.5 millimeter case. I think if that watch had 20 millimeter lugs and was a true 36, then I would tend to agree with the sentiment that the 36 is the supreme size for the Explorer. but I do think that this 40 millimeter sizing is a good choice by Rolex overall. You know, if you look at the Railmaster, you know, from Omega, if you look at all of the other sports models within Rolex's lineup, they're all hovering around 40 millimeters to 40 plus millimeters, you know, with the exception of some Yachtmasters that are 37 millimeters and so forth. So, you know, to each their own, but in my opinion, I think it's a good universal size. A lot of guys will appreciate this sizing. And I gotta say, of the three, my favorite one has gotta be the Mark II. To me personally, that watch, it just, like I said, it fits like a glove. It has that unique matte dial. It perfects what was already an existing, you know, a decent watch, the Mark I, but it wasn't fully refined. I feel with the Mark II, Rolex really brought that refinement into play and, you know, loomed the 369 Arabics, extended the length of the handset. It feels like a very refined product. And this 40 millimeter is a great model. But I think there's some things that could be a little bit more refined. You know, for example, I'm not too sure why the thickness is slightly thicker than the Mark II at 11.6 versus the 11.2 on the Mark II. And, you know, the lug width is a little bit longer than it needs to be, but you can't go wrong with this model. I mean, it is the latest and greatest. It has some great wrist presence and stance. It has the updated movement inside with the caliber 3230, 70 hours of power reserve, a silicone hairspring, Rolex's Chronergy escapement. It has a wider and bigger crown that is easier to operate as well versus the Mark II. I do feel that of all of the Rolexes, you know, obviously 1016 is kind of God tier at this point, but I really feel like the 114270, the one that came before the 39 millimeters, that was the bee's knees as far as the Rolex Explorers go. That one was just perfectly sized, had 36 millimeters, you know, true 36 millimeters, 20 millimeter lugs. The only downside to that watch was obviously the rattly bracelet and the clasp, and then the lack of luminescence on 3, 6, and 9. So this watch, I think, is a home run. There's definitely some disadvantages and flaws like any other watch, but I feel like it fits really nicely on my wrist. Even though I have bony wrists, I do like to have a little bit of wrist presence. There are some differences that I'll have to scrutinize a little bit further in detail, but I do believe that the hour hand is a little bit larger, has a little bit more surface area, and is a little thinner. So there's more surface area for lume. I do believe that the lume is a little bit stronger and longer lasting on this model. And the bezel is also a little bit slimmer than the Mark II 214270. So it gives a little bit more space, a little bit more real estate for the dial to shine through. I feel like this is a very solid watch that'll fit into any collection, and even if you have bony wrists like myself. So I think that they're really staying true to the formula of the overall essence of this watch. This watch has that Explorer DNA, has that recipe that we all know and love. Thanks for watching again, and I'll chat with you guys soon. Take care.